Welcome to the Insight podcast. Joining me on the show today is sport and exercise psychologist Carla Meijen. Carla works as an assistant professor at the University of Amsterdam. She's also the author of Empowered Birth: Lessons from Sports Psychology for Your Maternity Journey. I talked to Carla about the story behind her book, Empowered Birth, how lessons from sports psychology can be applied to the maternal journey, from pregnancy to birth to postpartum. We talk about goal setting, being flexible, and process goals versus outcome goals, the role of self-talk, the importance of social support, and much more. Enjoy the episode. So Carla, the title of your book, Empowered Birth: Lessons from Sports Psychology for Your Maternity Journey. Now that must kind of catch people's attention. It's an interesting topic, isn't it? So let's start with, well, how did that book come about? How did that topic come about?
Yeah, it's obviously a question I get all the time. And I suppose it's a combination of a couple of different things. So my research is very much around performing under pressure as well as the endurance. You know, what are the psychological demands of endurance performance? And often in maternity journey is kind of likened to, running a marathon. So you can see where some of those synergies already lie with some of the research that I do in, challenge and threat states. How do you approach something as a challenge, not a threat? And that endurance journey. Also, my work as an applied practitioner, work with endurance performance and kind of see what those, pushing through pain, discomfort, the pacing elements, the duration, those types of things. I get, encounters with that as in my role as a kind of an applied practitioner as well. And then obviously it's my own lived experience. So when I gave birth to my daughter, from my water breaking to her, actually pushing her out was 50 hours. So that was quite a duration. I suppose where I drew on pretty much every psychological strategy that I'm teaching my students, that I'm working on with athletes, and that I use my kind of own sports experience as well. So I suppose that kind of planted some seeds. But really what kind of brought it home was after giving birth, kind of having some conversations with other kind of new mums, and they talked about, okay, well, I've been to like NCT, antenatal classes, and they said, oh, try some of this, try some of that. And they said, well, actually, when I was in that situation where I guess there is pressure, like there's uncertainty, all these types of things, they were like, well, I just didn't remember. Like I completely forgot about all these things that I've been taught. And it was really that kind of gap between these really good intentions. I wanted to use this, but I couldn't put it into action. So that real kind of intention action gap is really prevalent. And I find that really interesting in kind of my research as well. And I suppose within the pandemic hitting, having, more time, I came up with that idea and I did some research and no one actually wrote a book about it. And I thought, okay, well, maybe there's something here to pursue. So there we go. That's kind of the combination of factors that made me write that book.
50 hours, man. You women are just superheroes. It's amazing. So what was going to, the lessons that we can learn from sports psychology, I find fascinating. One of my favorite things to watch on Netflix are those sports documentaries, the basketball players, the quarterbacks over in America, and then taking what we can learn from them and applying it to our own lives. Like it's fascinating. And to apply it then to the maternal journey is just, it's so interesting. But to get a bit more context, I suppose, when you say you work with endurance athletes, I'm interested now to hear more about what exactly you do with those athletes and how you help them.
Yeah, I suppose when we think about endurance, there's, from our research, we know some kind of very particular demands, such as the pain, discomfort, the pacing, the motivation. There's a lot of time to think. So how do you manage all those thoughts? And those are typically the types of things that, we work with when we work with endurance runners. Obviously, every endurance runner is individual. So what you do kind of a needs assessment. We call that kind of a case formulation to kind of understand what their demands are. and then kind of work with them around, okay, what are types of things that we can put into place? So, things like, how do you set your goals? How do those maybe fuel some of your pressure experiences? And how can you set goals in a healthier way is just an example of the types of things that might be working on with an endurance athlete. And that comes back quite a bit in kind of the maternity journey as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what this episode is all about. Like, what can we learn from sports psychology and apply to pregnancy, to birth, and then to postpartum as well. Before we get into that, the one other question I wanted to ask you was about whether you've had kind of a negative reaction to that topic, whether anyone has kind of come back with, well, pregnancy and what women go through is kind of sacred, this journey that they go through, and we don't need the kind of practical, practical tools applied to it. This is something that should just be set on its own. And of course, there's lots of traditional advice, isn't there, around the journey that women go through, and I suppose you might be battling against that as well. So, have you come up against any of that, and how might you handle it as well?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating topic area, isn't it? When we think about the maternity journey, it's so influenced by our kind of social, political, cultural backgrounds. And, I come from the Netherlands, and I was actually, my mom gave birth at home. So I could point out the exact place where I was born and where I was delivered. And, there was no pain relief wasn't, well, I mean, you could choose for it, but it was something within the culture where it was kind of advocated. I don't know if that's a healthy thing or not, but that was kind of in that culture advocated that, it's okay to give birth without too much pain relief. It's just an example of like a cultural background thing. Whereas, what you say, it's in other situations more kind of, much hands off, let, the women kind of engage in that birth process. Other cultures, like in Brazil, for example, most children are born via cesarean section. So it's very much a medical thing. So I think we really need to consider these kind of cultural differences and respect that and understand how that informs the pressure that women might experience when they maybe give birth in a different culture or a different environment. There's, I live in London. It's such a multicultural city. So I suppose the challenges for midwives in hospitals is like, how do you manage those different cultures? And they themselves have different kind of cultural backgrounds as well. So I think we just have to respect that there's no one way that works for everyone. And I, of course, when you write a book, you hope that it will hit like a big market. But I also, very much aware that it's not for everyone. Like, not everyone likes sports. Some people hate sports. They hate exercise. So I can understand that, they can really perhaps relate to the message of, the lessons we can learn from sport. You talked about the documentaries and the types of things that you can learn from sports. And there are some amazing things. Sport is such a powerful vehicle to put yourself, in another domain, because we're not always very good in crossing domains and kind of learning lessons from one domain that we've, maybe shown some really strengths into another domain. So hopefully that is something like a lesson or a message from the book that perhaps even if you're not that much into sports, are there maybe some other kind of settings, such as a leadership role in your job where you've performed under pressure, where, you've encountered similar demands and you managed to cope with those and use some different psychological strategies that you can actually then apply in the maternity journey so you don't start from zero.
So let's get into those applications then. Should we start with pregnancy? Well, it would make sense to start with pregnancy, wouldn't it? So that, of course, presents some mental and physical challenges. How can the lessons of sports psychology be applied during pregnancy?
Yeah, so I think what's really important at the outset is to, emphasize obviously a really individual journey. And we need to understand what the demands are that you as an individual experience before even implementing any strategy. So we're kind of having this toolbox, we're kind of looking into this toolbox, but we need to understand which tools work for which demand. So we first need to kind of really think about what are the different demands at the different stages of the pregnancy. So, you got your first, your second, your third trimester. That's kind of your traditional, how people look at pregnancy. So often, the first trimester, it's a lot of fatigue. It's like your body's getting ready. It's really tough, but people don't actually see that you're pregnant. You're not actually showing. So it's also the uncertainty. Lots of things can happen in that first trimester. And typically, when you think about sport and exercise, it is, really listening to your body. And maybe you've never really learned how to do that before because you always push through. So it's kind of reflecting on what some of those demands are in those kind of different trimesters, and how, it might be managing conversations of, your birth plan, or it might be the confidence, might be motivation. So it's really about thinking, what are the different demands that I'd experience? And definitely, the fatigue one is such a big one to manage. Like, how do you manage rest and recovery, as well as kind of that uncertainty? And, how do you understand what's within your control, what's not within your control, are kind of some examples of demands that people may experience on the kind of, the pregnancy aspect. I mean, obviously you've got a lot of physical things. I'm not a birthing expert, so I'm also a little bit wary going too much into, like these are the types of kind of physiological things that happen, because obviously we've got better experts for that. But you definitely, there's a whole bunch of mental demands that, you don't want to have a think about, to then, okay, what do I have in my toolbox? What do I need to build or kind of, get into my toolbox to then help me get ready for, giving birth, as well as that kind of postpartum period.
So I suppose, like an athlete, knowing when to rest is vital. You're feeling tired and run down, and maybe, and maybe at some points feeling like, well, this is normal. I should just be pushing through it. I should just be getting on with it. And so it's, I guess, finding that balance. And how does an athlete and how does someone that's pregnant, how do they know how to kind of navigate that? How do you know when it's time to rest? And how do you know when it's kind of just a normal, just a little bit of feeling of tiredness and run down, and actually you can still be going about your day? And I suppose one of the things you mentioned was listening to your body and being really aware and in tune. I thought it was really interesting what you said about that might be the first time that you're doing that, because in 2024 we're just rushing from one thing to another, and we very rarely sit down and actually listen to what our bodies and our brains are telling us, do we? So how can a woman navigate that and know when it's time to rest and be, confident enough to do that, and to make sure people around them know that they need to rest?
Yeah, I think it's such an important point. I'll come back to that in a second, but just to pick up on that, there's also a lot of conflicting advice. So when we think about sports and exercise and how to do that in the maternity journey, the Active Pregnancy Foundation has, done some really amazing work on getting that out there, because it's still a lot of medical health professionals kind of say, oh, stop, doing any kind of intense exercise, or, they're kind of wary for lifting weights and those types of things. So I think that's another mental demand, is kind of trying to navigate what you're able to do, what you're not able to do. And I think it is about, obviously fueling kind of yourself with that information, knowing what works for you as an individual, what your circumstances are, but also communication is such a key thing. So drawing your social support network. So obviously, your partner, or, whatever situation your setup is like, the people who can support you to help remind you that it's okay to rest and take that time to recover. But it can be challenging if you're in an environment where other people don't know that you're, pregnant, and you might not want to share that yet. So it's also like, how do you navigate that to still be able to rest and recover within an environment where people maybe don't understand why you have that need? So it's like navigating that, and learning from others is a really, really key thing. It's like, find people who have been in a similar situation. How did they navigate that? What are perhaps some lessons that you could learn from them as well?
All about community. Love that, for sure. Do you know Tia Toomey, the CrossFit athlete? Have you heard of her?
Yes, yeah, I've heard of her.
Yeah. Have you seen, because she's given birth, I think now recently, but I think she was training throughout her pregnancy, and there's some videos of what she was still doing, and I'm not suggesting that's a good approach, but it was pretty incredible to see the way she was still training. And you kind of watch the video, and it takes you aback a bit, because I guess traditionally we just wouldn't expect to see that, would we? But I suppose we don't want to go too far on a tangent here about exercising during pregnancy. But I think that's another interesting topic, isn't it?
Oh yeah, you should definitely get someone from the Active Pregnancy Foundation on your podcast, because they can break that down really well for you. And I think it's such an important topic. It's really important to get that out there. She's been such a good role model. She's got so many people on social media. I remember I got bombarded with her promotion videos as, a sponsored video. And I think it is important because we want to feel empowered. We don't want to feel like we can't do anything during that pregnancy journey, because there's so many health benefits from being active if your body lets you. So I think the key lesson is obviously to listen to your body, and pacing and learning to pace is really important. And kind of, I suppose one of the key things to embrace on that kind of maternity journey is that whole self-regulated learning, is that notion that, you plan what you're going to do, you act, you do it, and you reflect. So it's about trying how your body responds in a responsible manner. What worked for you? Maybe how could you, tune into some of the discomfort? What are the strategies that you used? How can you keep doing that during that maternity journey? So when it then comes to kind of giving birth, that's really a strong kind of strategy that you have ready to feel more empowered during actually that giving birth.
So like
time.
Yeah. So like an athlete, do you suggest a woman kind of tracks what they're doing, tracks their day? What did I do today? What did I eat? How much did I move? And then maybe at the end of the week, you kind of reflect on that. Oh, I felt really good this day. This is working for me. Oh no, I pushed it too far this time. And now like I'm really seeing the parallels between what an athlete might do and what someone who's pregnant might do as well. Is that something you should suggest, writing it down in a notebook or in a, an electronic document, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no harm for most people doing it, although some people might kind of start to over worry. So it is do that in a healthy way, not kind of in an obsessive way. But what I also think is really important is to reflect on the psychological strategies that you've used. So I felt good today. It's maybe not just of, what you've eaten, but it might be because you talked really positively to yourself. Like, something happened, maybe, you were out and about and someone got a bit cross and you managed that really well. And that made you feel very empowered. You think, okay, well, actually, that's something that's quite useful, because there'll be loads of opportunity times during that maternity journey when things happen that are unexpected. People might say things that you don't like. So how do you feel that you can learn from that? And I remember that Chemi Alcott gave, when I was a few weeks pregnant, she gave a talk about her exercising in a gym when she was pregnant, and that someone told her, well, why are you doing this? And she felt so like disempowered in that moment. And she was like, well, why let someone else tell me what to do? They don't know. They probably don't know anything. And I remember that. So I used that as kind of fuel during my maternity journey, that if anyone was going to tell me, oh, you shouldn't be running or you shouldn't be doing this, I used that as okay, I already thought about the strategy. So if anyone would come up to me and say, oh, you shouldn't be doing this, I already felt more confident to say, well, actually, what do you know? Are you a medical professional with expertise in this area? And so I think that's an example of the types of things that we can also do to, maybe feel more confident. So are there conversations that you can prepare in advance to then feel more confident going into that maternity journey?
It's crazy how willing people are to dish out their completely unfounded advice about things, isn't it? Whether it's pregnancy, whether it's nutrition, maybe finances as well. Some things are just passed down and just said repeatedly when no one's actually done any reflection on it. They're just repeating what they've heard from someone else, and they don't actually know what they're talking about. But it's really interesting how confidently people can talk on a subject that they know almost nothing about.
Yeah. And it can be really disempowering. Yeah. And so when we think about the demands that people might encounter during maternity journey, this might be something that can really harm their confidence and question what they're doing, whether that's the right thing. And I think this happens in sports as well. People might question your training methods. So how have you responded to that? So a lot of, I suppose what I try to get across in the book is, okay, how have you managed some of those demands before? What have you got in your psychological strategy toolbox that has worked? And where do you feel maybe some gaps are? Like what tools do you need to add to your toolbox? And during that maternity journey, in that kind of lead up to giving birth, where is scope for you to practice some of those things? What's realistic?
Yeah. So we can move on to birth then. So what about some techniques that can help for managing pain, stress? What can we take from sports psychology and apply to the birthing process? Is that the right phrase? I don't know if I'm saying the right thing here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, there's a lot of different ways of saying it. Yeah, giving birth, like what can we apply to the maternity journey, I suppose. So from kind of conversations, so for the book, I interviewed a dozen women. So from recreational athletes to Olympic gold medal winners. And kind of from that, some of the kind of demands, comparison with others is a massive thing, emotions, managing those, pain and discomfort, as we already talked about, that confidence, but also the effort, like the effort levels. How do you manage that? And some of the things that, we came up, like identified from those interviews and kind of from my work as a sports psychologist, types of things that we can look at as goal setting. So when we think about goal setting, it's for most women on the kind of maternity journey, they develop some kind of birth plan. So how do I want to give birth? Where do I want to give birth? Who do I want to be there? What do I want to do? Like there's so many questions. Like the NHS has a booklet that you complete and you then discuss that with your midwife. And often, women have this like very ideal picture of that birth plan. And that's good, but it becomes very unhelpful if you then things don't go according to plan. So if that birth plan needs to be thrown overboard and you've never mentally prepared for, okay, well, actually there might need to be a plan B and C, that becomes really difficult to manage. It just adds a lot of pressure. And what we know physiologically from, the moment you kind of, going into labor, you want to have a nice kind of hormonal equilibrium. And, if you have this kind of, cortisol because you're feeling stressed, that can really, disrupt that hormonal equilibrium. So it's really important, like how can you then, if you've already prepared that there might be, a plan B and a plan C, and you're okay with diverting to that plan B or C, then that pressure is much more kind of reduced. And hopefully, as a result, you don't have those kind of spikes in cortisol that can be quite unhelpful when we think about those kind of, the hormonal equilibrium that we're looking for at that stage of, when you're in labor. So I think that's one thing, is having that goal flexibility is such an important thing to consider. But the other thing is also, you might have come across that in your kind of own sporting background, is, when we setting goals, there's so much emphasis in sporting context on these kind of outcome and performance goals and not so much on these process goals. So we kind of want to make sure that you also set these process goals. So what is it what you can do? So it might be how you're going to do your breathing, or how you're going to do your counting. And so really set some goals for that. So for these different demands, if I feel like everything's going to be a little bit too much, I can do some get myself more grounded, focusing on breathing, or, my birthing partner can remind me to engage in my breathing. So it's like that real process goal is really important to consider as well. And the other thing is when we think about goal setting as a strategy, is that idea of chunking. So chunking it up, so breaking it down. So even a contraction, you can break down, you can chunk a contraction down. So, when you think contraction, typically, obviously not for everyone, but typically it's like 1 minute. So you have like a little spike, and you get to the spike and then it comes down. And then you have typically 2 minutes rest, and then kind of it goes up and it comes down. So you can even chunk that one contraction up, knowing that you'll be able to rest a little bit afterwards. So this whole idea of chunking is quite a nice way of looking at it. And Chrissy Wellington, who I interviewed for the book, she talks about how, when she's doing her Ironmans, how she chunks that up, like, then it's 10K, to go. Or she did the same during her maternity, during her labor, like when she was giving birth, she was chunking that up and found that a really helpful strategy to use. So so that's one example is kind of that, how do you set goals to reduce the pressure is a big kind of demand to manage through those examples of kind of using goal setting.
That's great. Yeah, Chrissy's a friend of my sister and my brother-in-law. She was at their wedding, so I did meet her very briefly once. Man, she was impressive, wasn't she? An impressive athlete. Incredible.
So many lessons to learn from her. And I think another strategy that I talk about in the book, so I talk about like self-talk, imagery, attention, mindfulness and breathing, social support. So, for example, self-talk is another kind of strategy that's quite helpful to look at. It's like, okay, what are the demands that I encounter, and what's the kind of type of self-talk that I can plan? So, when we think about self-talk, you can have self-talk plans that are very, proactive. You think about the demands. What are the types of self-talk statements that will help with those demands? And then obviously we also have this kind of spontaneous chatter that might occur under pressure, and, that's more kind of reactive self-talk, but you can do quite a bit in terms of your kind of self-talk planning. So things like pain and discomfort is such a big thing. Like if you're in discomfort, it might be that you're using instructional self-talk to divert your attention to breathing. And, that's something you can practice beforehand. So it might be that there's some, in the book, I give an example of yoga. There might be some kind of safe yoga poses where you might experience a level of discomfort, and can you practice some of these self-talk statements, see what works for you. So it might be something like the pain is temporary as a self-talk statement, or the pain, this is good pain. It will, help bring the baby one step closer when I think about every contraction. So there's things that you can do beforehand. And I think with self-talk, that's really important to match the self-talk to the statement, because there's some really generic kind of mantras out there when, you think about the birthing process, and they might not resonate with you. So they will do nothing when you're in pain or discomfort, or, need some, bit of effort to really push in that kind of final stage of labor. And so I do think that it is important, again, to map those demands. What can I do? And share those self-talk statements with who's with you in the room.
Interesting. Yeah. So before you're going to have to go through them and see what lands, see what works for you, see what kind of statements resonate. That's interesting.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm sure that there's some things that, you can reflect on from, maybe you've ran a marathon and, you really, really hit the wall, but you managed to push through. Like what were the types of things that you said to yourself that helped you? So that reflection kind of comes back. So again, what's then the lessons from sports that you can take with you? Because that's already grounded. Like it becomes so much more automatic. If it's something that you've practiced before, it becomes so much stronger and so much more available compared to, if you're doing something completely new. You're like, oh, that sounds like a nice statement. Let's try that. And you probably completely forget about it.
Yeah. In terms of breathing practices, are there certain, counts of in and out that you found to be, that are effective? Is it something like that how we might approach it? Like in for 4, out for 6, something like that? With
breathing, again, it's a practicing thing, isn't it? Because one of the things that typically as a sports psychologist, we practice is this diaphragmatic breathing. So when we're under pressure, what we tend to do is we have this very shallow breathing. We breathe up high to the shoulders. You see often when people are under pressure, their shoulders move when they're breathing. When you say, take a deep breath in, they would do like, and, they don't really get a lot of oxygen in their body. So one of the things that's really important is to think about this grounded breathing, like really focusing on the diaphragm. And the interesting thing is obviously things move around a bit when you're pregnant. So how the diaphragmatic breathing feels when you're not pregnant is a little bit different from when you're pregnant. So, that's a thing you can practice because you get more oxygen in the body, and that's helpful. When we think about the blood flow and all those types of things. So that kind of diaphragmatic breathing is good. And I think, yes, there's kind of different recommendations in terms of how many counts in and how many counts out. But I also think it's really important that you practice this so you feel more confident in that. So, maybe 5 seconds works for one, it's actually 6 seconds for someone else, and people count slightly different, right? In terms of how long their counts take. So, as long as you make sure that pattern isn't out of balance. So, sometimes when you only breathe in for, so many seconds and out for so many seconds, you feel out of breath. So you don't want to get to that state where you feel out of breath. So it's really thinking about the breathing count that works for you. So it might be that 6 seconds in, 6 seconds out is actually something that really works for you. It's a nice count. But there's some research, I don't know on the top of my head, about certain seconds, but
nope.
I don't have those.
Yeah, no, that's okay. But it's a little springboard for people, isn't it? That might be intrigued and then go and find out some different patterns that might work for them. Interesting. And so then onto postpartum, then the kind of the recovery physically and mentally from giving birth, but also there's the adjusting to motherhood, isn't there? Especially if it's your first child, you're going through huge changes, aren't you? So what can be applied here? How can we take the lessons from sports psychology in that postpartum period?
Yeah, it's such an important question, isn't it? Like what's happening postpartum? And again, it's like, what are demands that you're facing? And one of those major demands is that, identity change. Kelly Massey at Liverpool, John Morse, she's doing her PhD research on that. And one of the things that I love about one of her published studies is when she talked about the post-mom PB. So one of the athletes she interviewed was talking about how the PB was now going to be her post-mother PB. And one of the things when we think about our identity, our identity is made up of so many different elements. And we didn't develop our sports identity overnight either. And I think often we, like a lot of women, give themselves a lot of pressure to think that, you need to have this mother identity straight the moment you give birth. But that's not really realistic, right? Like the first time, you're CrossFit, like the first time you went into a CrossFit gym, did everything go well? Did you exactly know what to do straight away? Probably not. So why do you place those expectations on yourself to know immediately what to do after giving birth? So it's giving yourself that time to develop that post-mother identity. What does that look like? And allow yourself that this will change over time. It won't be static. Like our identity changes, our sports identity changes, our athletic identity changes, our mother identity changes. And I think that's such an important message to relay, is that these things change. Be kind and compassionate to yourself, and embrace actually what you've learned from that maternity journey back into sports as well. So it's, maybe you can also think about that as a strength-based approach where, okay, what have I learned from this? What can I take from that back into the sporting environment? So using that kind of reflection mindset there as well. But at the same time, the strategies that I talk about in the book, like the goal setting, but also imagery, self-talk, how can you apply that in the postpartum period? And then I think the other thing that I talk about in that kind of chapter that comes from kind of sporting environment is that whole idea of how do you decompress. So, for many women, it's kind of major event, right? Giving birth in that kind of maternity journey. And it's important to take some time to give that a place, to reflect on that. And what the UKSI, so the UK Institute of Sport, they have developed this kind of decompression, emotion decompression after Olympic Games, so after major events. And some of those kind of lessons can translate to that kind of postpartum period as well. So where you have that kind of hot debrief immediately after. So it's kind of that kind of brain dump of what's going on. Then kind of take some time zero where, don't feel the need that you immediately have to make sense of everything that's what's happening. And then it's kind of, really that emotion kind of decompression where there's different stages where, initially you kind of have that contracting where you hopefully sit down with someone and think about, okay, what am I getting out, or what do I hope to achieve from this kind of emotional decompression? But also put together a timeline of the meaningful moments. So what's happened, and then pick one of those things of the timeline that was critical to you and really label the emotions. Like I felt anxious, or I felt upset, or I felt excited. What are types of things that you felt and thought, and then really think about the impact that had. So kind of recognize the impact, and then kind of utilize that meaning, if you like, for looking ahead. So what's your plan for you looking after you, kind of thinking about that going forward, and setting some action points. So kind of really structured process to give you time to reflect on that. But at the same time, don't do that immediately. So do that kind of brain dump initially of, how you're feeling, then do some time zero before even engaging in an emotional decompression. For some women, this might be quite some time after, but at the same time, it is really important. I've got emails from, women who said that in even 8-9 years after giving birth, they feel bad about the experience because it wasn't the birth they wanted. And they would have liked to have felt more empowered. And so we won't always get the birth you want. It's not realistic. But what can you do to then come to terms with that, I think, is a really important thing if it does affect you. And obviously, if you had a birth where you experienced trauma, do make sure you seek help. I think that's really important. Don't try to resort and do it by yourself.
I think it's all so good. Such like points that I've just never even considered before, and that phrase, the decompression, emotional decompression. You hear that phrase and then think, right, that it just makes so much sense. Like, yes, someone, an athlete that has just achieved their wildest dreams or whatever, they've won the Olympic medal, and then they get swept up in all that kind of, I don't know, the media frenzy and all this other stuff, and they don't have a moment to pause, and they just have to kind of keep going. And I'm guessing a lot of those athletes then just crash and like maybe then can have a real low point. Isn't there kind of a phrase for that as well, like the post-gold blues or something, where you've achieved the thing that you've been working for years and years, and it's like, well, now what? And I imagine that there's a similar feeling perhaps when you become a mother. It's like, well, now what? I've gone through all this stuff, and now I've got to be exactly. Raising this little human. And also, I suppose you have the nowadays, depending on culture and things, but quite quickly people want to come and see the baby, don't they? And I've got 3 sisters, a brother that have all had children, and they've talked about this, that it's a lot, isn't it? It's so tiring because you're having to deal with sleepless nights and you've got a new baby in the house, but you also want to be polite and welcoming to all those family and friends that want to come and see the baby. And then I suppose, I don't know, you're just delaying maybe that crash that you're going to feel? And do we need to just be giving women and of course the partners as well some time just alone to process everything that they've gone through, and then, like you said, set some goals, make a plan? How are we adjusting to this new identity that we've got now as parents?
Exactly, and incorporate that goal flexibility. That's so important. On a personal level, that's what I've learned. I mean, obviously we had a pandemic, so anything I planned didn't happen anyway. But you still have to, you have good days, you have bad days, and maybe there's a minimum goal you can have on a day. Maybe it's even getting up and getting dressed is for could be the bare minimum. Rather than kind of, and your gold level goal would be to go out for a walk. So you could have like some goal flexibility to then still feel that you're, because I think often what happens is women then feel that they're not achieving anything. And that can be very disempowering, very disheartening. So what are types of things that make you feel like, okay, I'm doing well, I can see progress here. I feel that, okay, today was not the best day, but I've still, managed to give myself some time to just sit with my thoughts, or I allowed myself to cry. And actually, that's okay. That was, a good thing for me today. So I think that's really important, is that this comparison, like social media is horrible for that, where, you see someone who's just given birth and does everything fantastic, and you just sit down, in your house and things are just not anything like that. And that's one of the, I suppose, very big demands on that maternity journey, is that comparison game. And like, how can you control your journey? Being aware that, these people have different backgrounds, people have different demands, and, you don't always get the full picture. And I think that's really important to then, maybe use something like self-talk to focus on your own journey. This is my journey. What I've done today is, I can see progress from today to yesterday. And even if you don't see a lot of progress, there might be things that you achieve. And this is something that I advocate, is like, reflect on things that are going well. Don't just reflect on things that aren't particularly going well. And, when we work with athletes, it's so much easier for them to kind of highlight things where they were disappointed or stressed or anxious, rather than actually say, hey, this one event, I didn't necessarily perform very well, but I enjoyed it. I had so much fun. You rarely kind of get those reflections spontaneously. Like, you really have to go through kind of structured, like self-regulated learning, like a reflective, sheet where you really, not force is the wrong word, but like really encourage athletes to focus on some of those positive achievements, which are really helpful because they build your self-efficacy. So you're kind of, self-belief that you can do things, that you have the ability to do things. And that's, again, really important for that postpartum period as well.
Yeah, we do tend to just focus on the negatives, don't we? What went wrong? And also that comparison that you were saying as well. Yeah, as an athlete thinking, well, they're training like this and my training partner's beating me and running quicker times. They're getting better and I'm not. Like, what's going on? But of course, it all comes down to us, doesn't it? Like, comparing us to yesterday. Like, are we making progress? Well, not always. We might not always be making progress, but, are we doing the right things that are working for us? And not comparing all the time, I think is definitely an important message. Are there any other lessons? Yeah, and
your socials. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, go on, Carla.
I was just going to say the social support system around you is so important to remind you of that, like move you away from some of that comparison. And, like what you said at the postpartum, like it's also the birth partner who maybe needs that decompression stages. So, have those open conversations, but also really, use your social support network to your advantage where you can. Like, if you feel they draw you into the comparison modes, like see if you can find some other sources of social support to move you away from that.
Yeah. Well, it's another example of something that two people can go through, and maybe they're going through something, thoughts in their head. Maybe, I hear about both men and women that the baby arrives and they just don't feel attached to it, and they're kind of like, well, what's wrong with me? I don't feel like I love this child. There must be something. I must be an evil person. And then they share it with other people, and maybe another man or the woman says, no, I had that as well. It took a bit of time to come, and I guess what's going on there, a whole flood of hormones are happening, aren't they? And maybe affecting our thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And so that sharing part is just so important, isn't it? Because so often we think, I'm the only one in the world that's thought like this. There must be something wrong with me. Yeah. And then we share it and someone says, no, I went through that as well. Yeah, I thought the exact same thing. And you go, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so important.
Yeah. So, any other lessons, any other tools that we might apply before we wrap up the conversation? We cover them all.
Yeah, well, I suppose the social support one we just touched on, I think is a really important one. So how can we use that to our advantage? And in the book, there's a really nice example of a runner I interviewed, and she said that she could completely trust her birth partner because he's seen her in her vulnerable moments. Right. And so, when she would go for her long runs and really struggled with some of these really long runs, he was there and he knew exactly how she responded when she was under pressure, when she was in pain and discomfort. And so when it then came to the labor, he knew exactly what to do. Like, he knew what her, where she would struggle and how he could kind of get her back on track. Because, sometimes when you think about the contractions, if you kind of lose focus, they feel a lot harder. They feel a lot more painful. And he kind of, knew how to kind of re-engage her with the process when she was really flustered in the kind of different stages of labor. And I found that such a powerful example of how you can draw in your social support network. And especially, like your birth partner, if that's the first time they've seen you in pain and discomfort, they will struggle. They might be scared of seeing you in that way. If they've never seen you in pain and discomfort and they love you really, dearly, they're like, well, I've seen them in pain, like, and they feel flustered. They don't know what to do. So I think, if sounds a bit harsh, but if there are any opportunities that, they can see you, or at least you can share how you behave in times when you're in pain and discomfort, I think that's really important, to kind of, make sure that support that's there becomes not just, a person in the room, but you feel that that's really helpful support there. So I think that's really important, is to kind of really reflect who's in your support system, and if there's any negative or like difficult conversations to be had, do that early on, when you don't feeling the pressure just yet. So then actually you can put that support into kind of received as well as perceived support.
Yeah. Do you think we need to be wary as well of the different roles that kind of people can play, and maybe not, putting too much emphasis on the partner fulfilling lots of different roles? So does the partner have to be, I'm just thinking of like an athlete with their kind of the people that are around them. They have their coach, their training partner, their nutritionist, their sports psychologist, all these different people. And is there a risk that there can be a big onus on that one person to fulfill all these roles? Like, they should know a bit about this, they should be able to support me here, they should be able to do this. Whereas actually, like you said, like a wider social network of people who have got different experiences and different backgrounds. I mean, you must be a very popular friend with people that are pregnant, because they can come and talk to you and get your expertise in that one area, can't they? But then, of course, if we have all these different people that can input from different directions, that must be really helpful, mustn't it? Rather than placing all the emphasis on one person. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, yeah, 100%. Actually, coming back to Christy Wellington, she talked about how her social support system was really helpful, because she also had complete trust in the medical team, because as an athlete, she's encountered a lot of, medical professionals. And so she felt that they supported her because she knew the language that they were speaking. She felt comfortable in that environment, and she would see them as their team and their kind of social support network. So I definitely feel that if you just have one person and they don't know, like, especially if they're a first-time birth partner, they don't know how they're going to respond.
Yeah.
Some might find it really, really difficult. So having a plan B, I suppose, building in some goal setting with that as well is important. And, think about who are the different people who can play a different role. So one of the women I interviewed is that what she did is she was using WhatsApp to message different friends for different reasons. So to get their support. So, which is really nice, because when you're doing this hot debrief afterwards, you can kind of go through some of those really raw messages when you were in labor. But she did that really purposefully, where she would, have people that she would message, and that wasn't just the one person. So there was like a range of people. And I think that can be really helpful, because not everyone might respond immediately, but maybe some of those do. And you might just need some uploading at some stage, which can be really helpful. So I would definitely, recommend not to just focus on one person, and people can have different roles. Some people are very good in providing informational support. They're very good in doing their research and giving you that information. And others are very good at listening and giving you that emotional support. So just remember that we've got a lot of different types of support. You've also got that instrumental support. So that person is really practical, driving you to, all your appointments. But they might be absolutely unhelpful when it comes to that kind of emotional support. So just know the strengths of your social support network. Yeah,
it sounds like we're kind of creepy on like love languages, doesn't it? Like you have different partners that respond to different things. Is it acts of service? Is it touch? All that different thing. It's kind of interesting. There's kind of parallels there. This hot debrief as well. This is a phrase that I've never heard of before. But so that means like immediately post the event, you deconstruct in that moment. I've never heard that phrase before.
Yeah, like just, I guess, how you can think about it is maybe a brain dump of your thoughts and feelings. So it might just be those messages you send to your friends in the moment, like immediately after, or, maybe you're doing a voice recording or just write down, but don't try to make any sense of it. Like this real kind of brain dump of your thoughts and feelings.
Interesting, useful. Okay, right. Thank you so much, Carla, for sharing all this information, the lessons, the tools from your book. I do wrap up every episode with 3 quick fire questions, if you're up for that.
Yes, yeah, we'll do it, try.
So the first one is, what's one lesson you wish you'd have been taught when you were a child?
I think definitely the reflection on the positive things. I suppose that, I never did reflection much anyway as a child. I think it might be hard for some children, but actually, what's one thing you enjoyed about today? Just a simple question like that. I do that with my daughter now, and she's really embraced that. She's like, all right, mommy, what's one thing I enjoyed about today? And she wants me to ask that. And I think it's so helpful because most days, for most people, there's at least one thing that, was fun or, made you perhaps smile or, I appreciate that's not for everyone. But that's definitely something I think is quite a nice thing to do.
Mm. And next one, what's one habit that you've maybe introduced to your life recently that's helping you feel healthier and happier that our listeners might be interested in hearing about?
So definitely this, what do I enjoy?
Right, okay, that's a habit as well.
Today. Yeah, so you can easily make it into a habit. But I think one of the major kind of change, it's not recently, it's quite a long time, is the kind of notion of mindfulness, like practicing mindfulness, tuning in to your thoughts, feelings without judgment, has been very helpful as kind of a habit to implement. Mm.
And last one, if you could give everyone in the world one book, which book would you give them?
Well, obviously books are so personal. It's really hard to kind of recommend one in particular. But Invisible Women is a recent book I've read, which I think is a really important must read, about the kind of data gap when it comes to women. So, there's some amazing examples in there, but like simple things like the police uniform, like how they've been designed. They're not designed for women, like especially the vests, the safety vests. They don't accommodate for that women have breasts in the research. And, like menstrual pads, only since this summer, they're actually being tested with real menstrual blood. Those types of things. It's like this massive kind of gap. In sports sciences, women are too complicated because the menstrual cycle. So they have been excluded from a lot of, especially in cycling time trial studies, because, where they are in the menstrual cycle and the hormonal changes are too complicated for a lot of scientists to account for. So I think it's definitely, there's so many really interesting examples in that book. I think even an example about Sweden and like snow shuffling, how that had to be adjusted. Or like when they looked at that critically, actually adjusting the order of which road to shuffle the snow made a difference to the amount of incidents, people in A&E with falls. So I think it is a really fascinating book. If people are finding that kind of stuff interesting, a recommendation.
Nice one. And talking of books, where can people get their hands on a copy of your book, Empowered Birth?
Yeah, so it can be obviously bought through the kind of main booksellers or directly from Sequoia Books.
Excellent. And people that want to connect with you and see what you're up to, where's the best place for them to do that?
So I'm on Instagram as Carla Sports Psychology. I also have a website, which is carlameijen.com. So that's MEIJEN. If you're wondering how to spell that. I'm also on Twitter /X at Carla Meijen.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the great questions.
Thank you for tuning in. I really hope you found my conversation with Carla insightful. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with friends, family, and colleagues who you think would find it helpful too. You can also support the podcast by following and rating the show on whichever app you're listening on. Thanks again, and I look forward to bringing you another episode soon.